Welcome, everyone. If you're here for the replay or here live with us today, I am so honored that Rula is here with us today. And I'm also really excited that all of you are here tuning in, and we're all meeting probably at different places, like with things going on with our own personal lives and also with looking at what's going on in the world. So thank you so much for being here. As we go here, feel free to share your comments. Feel free to ask questions. We'd love to hear from you as we go. Uh, Welcome, Rula, to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm so grateful for you coming to talk with us today.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm very grateful for you connecting with me, and we tried to connect before, and really being there for each other in these times. I think it's really important.
Yeah, so for our listeners who don't know, Rula and I had talked about getting together in Toronto because she was coming to Canada, and we chatted about that, and then here we are chatting today. I really want to make sure that we get into how can we help yoga teachers right now who are watching what's happening to Palestinian people in Gaza, in the West Bank, also in Jerusalem, if I have my stuff right. I also want to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves and others at the same time. Rula, before we get into all of this, can you tell our podcast listeners what's the work that you do as a yoga teacher and who do you do it for?
Sure. So my journey started in different fields in administration, and I was born and raised in Jordan with Palestinian origins, where my father was born there, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, and my paternal grandfather, and their fathers were born in between Bethlehem, and they lived between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. So I was working for many years in the corporate world, human resources, hospitality. So I'm not that old, but I have two boys. So Michael is in first year university, and the youngest is grade 9 right now. But I came to yoga as a self practice many years back in 2006. And when I left my full time job, I started exploring the yoga. So, to explain and shed light here, Jordan didn't have many options here. So, we had probably a couple of teachers, no studios, or one studio. And so that was probably in 2006, 2007. And I grew more and more interested in the practice, and mainly the healing practice of yoga. And really, it really dives deep into the body and the mind. Anyway, to cut it short, I got into my first teacher training in 2010, 2009, 2010. It was over 6 months in Canada while I was living there with my family, with the yoga tree in Toronto. And after that, I started teaching there for a while. And while I was there, there was the Iraq-Syria conflicts and wars going on. And Jordan, of course, has had more and more refugees coming in. So if you probably know a little bit about Jordan, Jordan, of course, people when during the Nakba 1948, many Palestinians moved to Jordan, Syria, but there was a big concentration in Jordan. And a big majority of Jordanians have Palestinian origins, and the same for my family. So we were getting more refugees after the Syria and Iraq war. And as yoga teachers, and we had more yoga teachers by then, we were thinking, how can we serve? How can we practice, save and not only teach and do that? So I started offering just volunteer sessions for urban refugees. And then I met through that two other Irish teachers who were coming with their trauma and trauma sensitive yoga. And then we grew the program into a 5-day program over 4 years. We used to offer yoga teachers the training, and in return, they would volunteer and teach either in urban refugees in centers in Amman, around Amman, or in the camps. And the experience was I have to say, was very enriching, because you not only taught yoga as an exercise. Yoga, of course, was being taught as something that is healing and building people communities. So people were actually really enjoying coming to classes and connecting with each other on a different level than what they were experiencing outside. So it was more like a space for them. And from there, currently I specialize in yoga since 2012. I teach at my home studio, and holding space maybe was a little bit different during these times. Well, we have connections of yoga teachers in Bethlehem, in Ramallah, in Palestine as well. So there is this community. Also, we built it through the Yoga Mandala project. This is when we were working with trauma sensitive yoga. So it really brought us together as a community, as teachers, for a common purpose. And this was my experience in terms of, I would say, limited experience when it comes to trauma. But it gave me these tools to be able to modify any class, really read the room well, and try to sense what people really need at the moment, and try to serve that. Yeah.
And so when you and I talked a while ago, maybe a week or 2 ago, you had said that you're holding space for your students who a lot of them are Palestinian or have family there. Can you tell us what well, first of all, I would just wanna say thank you so much for continuing with your classes and having that gathering and connection space for your students. Can you tell us what that felt like? Or what you learned from that?
Yeah. Since we're shifting now into what's really happening right now, just allow me to take maybe just a couple of breaths in silence, just to honor the martyrs, everybody who's dying and still like going through what they're going through right now, if that's okay. So actually, when you asked me, Shannon, last week about how you're holding space, I was like, oh, am I holding? I was like, I didn't think about that. Because since everything started happening and the attack on the whole thing erupted, and the attack on Gaza and the bombings and the pictures and everything, just so many emotions have been happening. So a lot of anger, a lot of fear, a lot of agitation, and a lot of anxiety, and a lot of disappointments, and a lot of feeling that we're misunderstood, and a lot of feelings that we want to take action. So when you said, how are you holding space? I reflected, because the first week we canceled classes, it was too heavy. It was really too heavy to be able to even come in class and sit on the mat and pretend nothing is happening around us. So we canceled that, because there was this feeling of anger, where usually anger is a transformation. It is asking you, to do stuff. And as anger was emerging, I felt, so everything I'm going to say today is related to me as what I'm going through. I'm sure I echo a lot of teachers in Jordan, maybe around, but this is my own experience. So I'm not judging anyone if they don't feel the same emotions. But anger and agitation was asking us for action more than sitting down on the mat. So we were going in demonstrations, we were acting in petitions. We weren't even getting to donations and stuff. This is what was out of the questions. We were doing the demonstrations with everybody daily and asking for specific things. And So the first week was no way to do classes. And then when we resumed and I was reflecting on your question, I was like, I think my students were holding space for me and yeah, for each other. Because even though I was teaching in trauma exposed communities, and they were coming with different traumas, for the first time I feel everybody in the room was going through the same thing, the same anxieties and worries, but at the same time, it wasn't about us. You know, that's the dilemma. It's not about us. Why am I taking care of myself right now? It's not about me. Palestinians and our families in Gaza are being bombed and killed, and whole families are being bombarded and wiped off the civil books. And why am I taking care of myself? So we went into this feeling of also like feeling guilty, but at the same time we didn't allow that feeling to go on, because then it will cripple you. It will really stop you from helping, stop you from feeling what is needed. So we were holding space together, because I teach in terms of technicalities, because I teach yin and flow. There was a bit of difference technique. So in flow we were able to let out some some anger steam through the poses. We were able to really work on certain parts of the body. In yin, it was quite challenging, because yin is, there's a lot that you want to help people to ease yin. We're living in a time of turmoil in yang. Everything is so active and everything is so violent. And to ask people to go in a yin state needed a total shift in perspective. So I added the shaking to the class. I added a lot of sighing out and different breathing techniques. I added a bit of movement, even in yin poses. We really were modifying. And then music was out. I usually put a lot of music. We couldn't play. I couldn't. It was triggering. It wasn't really something I could have in class. And after weeks, I moved to actually putting for everyone Arabic Oriental music, like oud. You know, it's like a guitar instrument. So everything was shifting like in different ways. Even words felt empty. Like tell people, feel calm. What? Feel? You can't feel. Everything felt so, it's just overwhelming. And many of the words that we actually teach in our classes, even though I had that trauma experience of teaching, felt also very heavy. And it made me really reflect on, are we doing the right thing when we're when we're teaching and carrying classes? Are we really addressing everybody in the room? And and how can we be here while we are attending to people in Gaza? How can we keep the attention there? So we started again in terms of technicalities. Excuse me. And because the season now is winter, and as you may know, in Yin Yoga, winter is about fear, and autumn is about grief. So again, I was avoiding these things, because to speak of these things is something later on, while while our people in Gaza are not able to grieve the dead, and many of them didn't have any family member left to grieve them, while I ask people to take care of themselves was constantly very challenging. We as a community, I think also everybody was going through the same thing. Some held some circles were something also difficult to sit in, yeah. But we started to have conversations. So things start to emerge in terms of yoga activism. What can we do? how can we really implement what we teach, what we learned? And I have respect for many teachers I was trained by. But again, how do we really, people are having an existential plights, and how do we apply yoga now? What do we do? So many things starting to arise from there, and the feelings shifted from anger to fear, and from fear there was one particular feeling. I shared it with you, Shannon, maybe, but I would really like to share it here with everybody. And a good friend of mine who's now coming more into writing and stuff like that, and she described it well, because I realized, and many people around us here in the community didn't know, that this word doesn't have an equivalent in English. They're like, really? We didn't know. So one of the feelings, allow me to read it from a good friend of mine, Khadija Mahaysan, and she described it really well. This word in Arabic is qahr. And qahr is a word that describes exactly us Palestinians, what we feel, and not able to describe it to people around us. Let me read it, and I'll give your audience they can reflect on that in their own way. So there's no English equivalent to the Arabic word qahr. The dictionary says anger, but it's not. It's when you take anger, place it on a low fire, add injustice, oppression, racism, dehumanization to it, and leave it to cook slowly for a century. And then you try to say it, but no one hears you. So it sits in your heart and settles in your cells, and it becomes your genetic imprint, and then moves through generations. And one day you find yourself unable to breathe. It washes over you and demands to break out of you. You weep, and cycle repeats. So it's a description of generational, something that's been going on for 75 years. And it's very interesting. I was thinking about it this morning. Like, I'm sure people who went through freedom movements and fought for indigenous people, who fought for, I'm sure this word was there. And it's interesting to look for how they were describing this for their generations, because it's not something unique to us, but it's something that we uniquely feel, and we're entitled to feel, because we're going through this right now. And our people are going through this. No matter what we say in terms that we feel what's happening it's beyond. So this morning, because you asked me, how are you, this just before we started. And I said, this question we don't ask these days. We're like, it's like, because everyone is going through the same thing. Some people try to get distracted with full-time work, that's good. But last night, I think they shut down internet and everything in Gaza. And I slept, I was watching a lecture, and then I slept, and we couldn't sleep because, I was worried about what's going to happen in the morning. There was heavy bombardment all night on Gaza. And I woke up in the morning and I was terrified to even open my phone and look at it. So I did a little experiment, okay? I'm gonna try not to be, I'll try to share it with you, but I was really terrified to open the news and see what happened last night. I was like, I can't avoid this for long, but I can't do it right now. So it took me some time. But what I did, actually, I opened on the, I'm gonna share it from my screen here. Share the numbers. So I said, okay, let me do a little experiment. And I wanted to look at the numbers. I said, okay, I'm not going to look at the news. I'm going to go to the OCHA, the organization. I'll send you the link there where it updates the casualties and everything in terms of numbers. So I looked and it gave me, actually this morning it was 14,000. I just opened it now, it's 15,000. 523 people, Palestinian, reported killed. 41,000 reported injured. 46,000 plus housing units destroyed. Like my home, your home, whole units completely destroyed. 1.87 million people are displaced. I kid you not, the number, I was like, it's like the stock market. The numbers keep moving up on the contrary of it. It's like, so what I said, I looked at the numbers like, okay, wow. And I wanted to move to personal stories. So I opened my phone and this is where it hit. And it gave me a perspective where sometimes people who don't live who don't live in the region and don't experience what we are experiencing can look at it from a number perspective. And yeah, wars have victims, 15,000, over 50 days, 47% of them children. Yeah. But then when you look at the stories, and this is what we're asking people to do, is really connect on the ground. Really connect on what's going on in the ground, on the ground, and what's happening, what are personal stories that are coming out. There's so many personal stories, like people like you and me and other teachers around the world. But there are limitations why people don't connect on a personal level. And these are things we really have to come across and deal with them. Maybe through our practice, maybe through something else, but it gave me this perspective, okay, we are numbers, but if you look closely, we are actually humans like everybody else.
I want to ask you about this because I'm hearing from some people that looking at the news or looking at personal stories on Instagram, because I follow Motaz and Bisan, and I'm more than happy to share a whole list of people. I actually am following these people now to make sure that they're still okay. Like, I feel really connected to people who I never knew before. I would like to hear your comments on what about when it feels too dysregulating to look at the news? What if people feel like, well, I'm helpless. Why should I look at this? It's too upsetting. And I would encourage also those of you who are here live to share your questions for Rula and how has it been feeling, or what things have been feeling like uncomfortable or frustrating, or
Yeah.
So yeah.
Please share questions. Because again, it's not about us, it's not about me, it's about people in Gaza, and it's about everybody who can really make a difference right now. So I'll tell you, Shannon, we can't even look into the news and just watch it every day. People are feeling, so we went through different feelings, as I said, and one of these feelings was helplessness. But before we go into that, I just want to say it's good to keep it in our perspective of yoga. So what I was reflecting on, and why we call this episode Ahimsa in times of conflict and probably times of divide, is very, very important. I took another look at, so I follow the Bhakti tradition in terms of the philosophy and the readings, and I really appreciate how it explains the philosophy of yoga and gives us a lot of daily life tools to give a different filter and perspective to life, not only the material, but yet I am struggling with understanding everything that's going on. But let's start with the yamas and the niyamas. If you're not a yoga teacher, that's okay. There's a general rule in yoga that is called Ahimsa in Sanskrit. And I always explained Ahimsa as non-violence. And recently, Ahimsa, and from listening to other lectures, is not non-violence, because it's so difficult. It's impossible to live with no violence at all. And Ahimsa is actually less violence. How can we do less violence while living on this planet Earth, let's say. Forget that it's about yoga and all of that. How can we do less violence? And the visions that was coming to me in my head was from the Bhagavad Gita, which is the sacred book in the yoga tradition, about it opened in the battlefield where Krishna and Arjuna, the warrior, let's put it in simple words, he was about to fight his family and kin, and it was over land. And Arjuna was actually wanting him to fight, and Krishna wanted him to fight, and Arjuna was trying. He was going through a dilemma in his mind, like, these are my family, my cousins. How can I do this against? They took our land, but this is my family, and the whole dialogue is. There's a lot to it, of course. It's 700 verses, but the opening was about Lord Krishna asking Arjuna to do his duty and fight. Because if he doesn't do this harm, more harm is going to come later on. I'll leave it to your listeners to explain it the way they relate to, but it was very interesting to read this verse and the way it was explained to me and relate to it in this way in these times. So Ahimsa means violence, and A in Sanskrit, means negative, non-violence. But it's explained in many ways about doing less violence. So when you're a vegetarian, you're doing less violence. When you're in conflict with your family, you try to find one family member and later you can deal with it. It's about how do we balance this. When it comes to politics, it's totally different. When politics is about Ahimsa and it's not about Ahimsa. That's why we're supposed to be the ones who actually stop the politicians and say, okay, enough. Yeah, you punished the other side, you bombed 15,000 people, homes, children, 50% are children. This is enough. So we're supposed to be the ones to say stop, enough harm. And as the Buddha said, you can't seize hatred by hatred, and we can't crime begets crime. We are seeing hate crimes around the US, and we're worried for our both sides, like people are not supposed to do that to each other. Yet we consider ourselves conscious communities, aware communities with higher vibration. But when it comes to our gender and when it comes to our region, it's right here, by the way, Jerusalem is right over there, just pointing. It ceases, it stops. Double standard applies. So I just want to, through your podcast, Shannon, I'd like to ask people to speak up, and we'll explain in a bit how we can help each other speak up. But I want to say that by your silence, you're hurting. You're doing more Ahimsa than Ahimsa. There's more violence happening because we are accepting. And what I was seeing with the Jewish Voices for Peace and people like that, I say, not in our name. So I don't know how people in the Western world are accepting that these crimes are happening in their name. And I have to say that people are not accepting that. And we can see it on the streets. And we can see that people are really, the issue of Gaza is just uniting everybody, because it's not only about Gaza. It's about the dominance. It's about how we are divided and how we are controlled and how we are. And still we find many of us are silent, although we know that we are being controlled and dominated and divided. After all the practices that we have as tools. So Ahimsa, I would say, if you're silent, I understand the awkwardness of speaking up. I understand that it's awkward for you to speak up. And I understand, but please watch non-mainstream media get the news. So this can move us to the next step in yoga, which is satya, truthfulness. And truthfulness, when I first was exposed to the 8 limbs, I'm like, wow, these are amazing tools. And they come across all religions, different ways, different colors. But this is such a comprehensive system of the 8 limbs. And I was reading it, and I was connecting it with my faith, and I was connecting it with many things in my life. But then when you're in such a plight right now, people are actually dying every second, every minute. Every nine minutes, one child in Gaza is killed. I don't know what else are we waiting for on live TV. But satya, if I'm understanding satya, which is truthfulness, the way it was explained to me is truth to myself and truth to people, and see things for what they really are. So if I am really working towards, I mean, in general, not me, but if I'm working in a community towards enlightenment, awakening, all of that, what's my magnifying glass telling me? What am I looking at? And this brings us back to the Bhagavad Gita, the battlefield. It's about internal. If I'm internally battling and I'm fighting internally, oh, should I speak up? No, I don't. I can't speak up. This, I would upset this group of people. But then if I don't speak up, I'm going to upset this group of people. So there's a conflict going on. I think you should sit with yourself and consider truthfulness. How true are you to your values? And are you applying your values only to one group of people? Group of my friends, we were discussing the other day, and we said, if this is what's happening to Israelis, we don't want genocide. This is not what we're asking for. And this is another misunderstanding from people in the West about when we say from the river to the sea. And I highly recommend people to listen to the podcast I shared with you this morning, Shannon. Things are misleading people to understand our message is wrong. We chant for freedom. We don't chant for genocide. It's about a Zionist movement. It's not about Jews. Jews have lived together with Palestinians and Arabs in the region, and it was flourishing, and it was amazing. And I highly recommend this documentary by the Jazeera I also shared with you. It just shows you the abundance of the land when everybody was really living their best times in the 20s, in the 30s, and then until 1948, until the movement turned into a Zionist political, I would say, bloodthirsty movement, because it's about replacing us. It's not about living with us. It's about total elimination of Palestinians taking the land. So in order to be true to yourself and to be true to ourselves, you have to really sit with yourself, dig deep, and see things for what they really are, which comes to the next point is in the niyamas, vidyaya, which is self-study. We use it at, I know self-study in the 8 limbs relates to studying holy scriptures and all scriptures. That's great. But also do your homework. It's okay if you don't know the history. I didn't know many things about my history, although I was going every summer to Bethlehem. My grandma's house was the best summer holiday ever. I wouldn't want to go to anywhere in the world. We would go to the beach. We would go, it was we had access to the beach in there. But it was, look at the history and try to look into neutral resources where they show you the history. So study that, articulate yourself, weapon yourself with the real right terms. Media is really playing with words the whole time. Killing a terrorist. There's a distinction between a freedom fighter and a terrorist. Please look in the history. Look into what they did, the movement in India, the liberation of Africa. Look into all these movements, and they're supposed to send us messages into that. And then when you're asked to speak up, at least you know where to stand, what terms to use, who to follow, how to really go about this. And we'll come to the end, we'll give some advice on what you can do and where to go with that.
I want to share one comment here from
Yes.
Crunch when I was asking, like, how do we feel? What do we do? And I'm saying people who aren't in your area right now, who aren't directly in it. And Crunch had shared how we feel is quite frankly irrelevant in the face of people being murdered. We should not be centering our feelings, especially not on social media. Process in private with your family and friends. And I think this is really key. And then Crunch also commented, focus on uplifting Palestinian voices and their stories, write to your representatives, have conversations with people in your network. I think these are all really important right now. And also, I want to highlight something that you said, to look like finding the truth right now is kind of hard because some of us, me included, will look for something that like fits with your already what you believe, right? That confirmation bias, like, yes. So finding that truth, I think we need to. I love that you're going to share some resources here and that it's not like I have people saying to me, well, with this war or with this conflict, that started October 7th. And these are people in my own circles. I'm like, well, wait a second, like, do you know about the 1948 Nakba? So
Yeah.
I appreciate that you're saying, let's look at the truth of this.
And Crunch is part of your team, right? That's
Yes,
great.
she is.
Crunch, I was going to say that. But so it's a good, this is what we were saying. It's not about us. It's about what the people are going through. And in terms of reading into history and resources, we always hear as I grow up, it was always said, oh, it's complicated. Oh, it's nobody understand. Well, yes, the colonial, the oppressor, and they made sure to complicate things. So many treaties, so many agreements, so many borders, so many checkpoints. It is complicated to live there, but it's not complicated to understand. There's an oppressor, and there is indigenous people, and this is not difficult, but we can help each other really learn about it. But when it comes to satya and truthfulness, at least what we can say and at least what we can do is name the harm. We need to name it out. We need to call out that this is harmful. This is not helping anybody. And it's not going to help, by the way, the Israelis and the Jews. It's not going to help them because you're creating more hatred.
Yeah.
And Hamas, by the way, is not a terrorist group. Hamas is freedom fighters, and this child who just saw his whole family wiped out is going to create even more resistance in him. Do you think this child is going to come up in a normal life? So what are we doing? We're creating more.
Let me just add some context for our listeners who haven't been looking at the history of Hamas. There's a huge percentage of Hamas military that are orphans from previous bombings.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful also to our book club who's been reading more about the history of the area and the real stories of Palestinians. And I guess the question I would ask to people who are living like me in a free country where I can move, I can go and drive somewhere and visit somewhere, and I'm not in a place that's really restricted and occupied.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be asking, like, how do you think that would feel over generations? I also would encourage people to listen to voices like Gabor Mate, who was a Zionist, is Jewish, went to Israel, also went to occupy Palestine, and calls it one of the largest concentration camps on the planet and the longest standing ones.
Yeah, it's a prison. His people are not allowed in, but Even when they opened let me give you a small, how controlled Gaza is: the water, the electricity, the internet. Not only that, your travel, your medical, medications, the pharmaceutical. Even when aid was coming in, the Israeli army was opening the packages, taking out any anesthesia from it.
Any what? Sorry?
Any anesthetics. And we heard the story of a doctor. He was on social media where he had to amputate a leg for his child without anesthesia, and he passed away, his son. So there is this systematic, deliberate genocide that's happening, and we just need to name it. We need to name so the harm can stop, so we can think of how to move, what to do, because this is going to keep erupting. It's not helping anybody. This is going to, you're creating more hatred, and not only in Gaza. And what I want to say is what's happening in Gaza, because it's spreading all over the world, it's really unveiling so many truths. We see that the organizations that came up are helpless when it comes to power. And when it comes to who says we stop or we don't stop, even Human Rights Watch, even the UN, like how is it possible that only two people in the world are controlling this and not listening to any of the organizations that were actually set up for that purpose, for the humanitarian purpose,
Right.
for the purpose of people, of the children rights. Forget about the people, for children rights. Everybody is not able to do anything. So it tells us again, how true is that? I need to name the harm. What do we do?
Yeah, I heard someone say, like, I don't really know what's going on. I'm just a random person on the internet. Don't listen to me. Listen to every humanitarian aid organization out there who's saying this is a humanitarian crisis and we need to see the harm stop. Um, Sherry, thank you so much. Sherry says, one, confirmation bias is so strong on this issue for many. Thanks for mentioning. And two, name the harm. Thank you, Sherry, for saying like those two things. So naming the harm that's happening right now and calling attention to it. I honestly, I felt what it felt like to kind of, so for about 4 days, I thought, maybe I won't say anything. Maybe I'll just be quiet. And I felt like I can't anymore. A huge part of it is that it's children. That's a huge part. And I realize there are innocent adults as well, men and women. But for me, it's really,
It's one of the most highly populated areas, the second highly populated in the world.
yeah. I think we don't understand the numbers and the size of land.
It's about, I don't know, 300, 400 kilometers, and you have 2 million people. It's highly condensed and very flourishing. We have universities. We have, what is it, 39 hospitals. There's everything. There's libraries. People go to the access to limited access to what they fish and all of that, but there is life. This is not empty land. It's not a desert. They're bombing actual civilians. And please listen to the podcast by Muhammad Kurd. I forwarded. Please share it, because he explains everything that Westerners, I would have to say just Westerners here, but someone who doesn't experience the culture has doubts about things like, or feel intimidated by. Many people are intimidated by what Hamas represents. Many people are intimidated by the kufiya. My scar, I don't have my kufiya. My son took it this month. Many people are intimidated by from the river to the sea. Many people are. Please understand what these mean. Clear it out of the way, and then look at what's happening, get the facts right, and then think of what you can do, because there's a lot that you can do. And what I want to say is, as I started saying it, Gaza plight and what's happening there unveiled so many of the things that we took for granted. You took your freedom, right? Freedom for speech for granted. We're taking posting online for granted, and we're seeing that we're being censored. We're being hunt down. Our people are being imprisoned for holding a flag of Palestine, or even the colors of that. So many things are Gaza is really teaching us a lot about. For me personally, the first thing that happens is shifted priorities. My priorities totally shifted because people next door are dying by the minute, and there's no other priority than this thing right now. So the lessons about resilience comes from hard times. So why are we living lives of comfort? Why are we encouraging our children even for over comfort in everyday life? Resilience and courage comes from really going through hard times. I'm not saying invent hard times, but what are things can we learn from messages that are coming from Gaza? As we said, self-study. The biggest thing is when people really look closely into these stories, you would see that everybody's saying, Alhamdulillah, thank God. Like I posted a video with an audio this morning. Someone is saying, my family is gone, my home is gone, Alhamdulillah, thank God. Because it brings us to another niyama, which is ijbara, which is surrender to a higher power. And in general, I would say, specifically in this case, people in Gaza and Palestine have a very strong faith. And they have faith there is a higher power. And whoever is doing harm will be really paying for it in some way or another. They believe in God. They believe that these children are martyrs. They believe that everybody who dies for this cause is a martyr. So it humbles us to see that someone who just lost everything, technically everything, is saying, thank God, we're okay. We're here. We're not moving. You know, they're so rooted, you can't take them out. That's what Israel's been trying, the apartheid regime has been trying to do for 75 years. And people don't want to be uprooted because they did that in 1948. They left homes thinking we're coming back next day, next week. And until now, you have what, 6 million Palestinians around the world don't have the right of return. And my story, part of that is it took me 30 years to be able to reclaim my ID, my Palestinian ID, so I can go back and visit. And I consider myself a lucky one that I was able to reclaim my ID and revisit. My mother, she can't go now. Her ID was completely canceled. So many stories of people who actually went out, left everything in their homes, and someone just came ready. So what I'm trying to say is indigenous people will fight because their roots are there. But people who come from abroad, it's a different case. At the first danger, they can fly. They have other passports. And we've seen this, other nationalities, even in the army. So that's why when we say Hamas is a grassroots organization that is fighting for the land them and their ancestors lived in. And we're not saying we want to genocide against the other party, but reclaim justice before dialogue. Justice and then dialogue. But we can't have. And history shows that we had dialogue, civilized dialogue, and agreements, and peace treaties.
And a lot of peaceful marches. There's a long history there of trying to get the world's attention. That podcast that you had sent me speaks to that really well. What also would you say to our podcast listeners who are Jewish and feeling afraid? I've talked to a lot of podcast listeners who are Jewish and feeling like I'm afraid, or Israel is my safe place to go. And how do we be safe? Like the people who are feeling attacked and who, quite honestly, will feel triggered by saying like Hamas is a grassroots and it's from years of oppression that it's coming. What would you say to them?
I would say there will be no peace. Again, no justice, no peace. If there's injustice, and dehumanization of Palestinians, like calling them human animals, and all of these things to justify what they're doing, there'll be no peace. And laying the ground for what's happening right now didn't come overnight. This 9/11 was the best tool to create this Islamophobia and create this image of terrorism, and everything that comes from this part of the world is terrorism. I'm not going to go into that. We're not politicians. We're not going to go into that. But what I'm saying, the media really manipulated. And
I remember feeling it. I'll just say it. Like, I remember feeling it after 9/11. I remember feeling really vulnerable, worried when I'd get on a plane with someone wearing a certain. I remember feeling it. And the Islamophobia was and is still very prevalent in North America.
But remember, it's division. And this is what they want us to feel. But what I would say is, name the harm, go to the root cause, give justice, and then see how people can move forward. Nobody wants this to happen. And
nobody, no.
And what they're trying to do is eradicate it completely on live TV. They're actually, right now, I mean, if I'm looking at the numbers right now, since I don't know if they update right now, it's just on live TV, and they were very clear, we want to eradicate Hamas. But they've killed less than 100 Hamas fighters. 250,000 civilians and children.
I have a real question. Like, my critical mind in this thinks, okay, why can't people just hide amongst civilians then, if they're this, we're going to go get all the bad people here? I
hide in I think part of it is to go back to the question of people understanding what happens so when I lived outside Jordan, and when I talk to my foreign friends, when we speak of the plight of Palestinians and the issue of Palestine and Israel, I always say you will only understand it if you go visit. And go visit. You need to go and visit and understand what is really happening on the ground. And Hamas was intentionally pushed into Gaza. I mean, again, I'm not a politician, but we listen, we live here. It was intentionally pushed slowly into Gaza. And Hamas was actually, many years, Israel was having, it was elected by the people. Look, Shannon, when you look at the news and you say that Hamas or Israel conflict, it's like putting them in equal power, but it's not. They're not in equal.
Also, I want to call attention to, that's like, we're looking away from the West Bank right now that is not run by Hamas, and there's a huge oppression and violence against Palestinian people in the West Bank right now. So yeah. I think the part that's complicated is, sure, all the history, and like you said, you have to go there. The part that's not complicated for me is that I'm standing up for peace and saying, I don't want this. I don't want my tax dollars to support this. I'm going to speak out for a ceasefire across the board, everyone. And I'm going to continue to speak out for freedom, for Palestinian people to not be oppressed. Yeah.
Power is there, money is there, and there's motives behind it, but the people are speaking up, and I think this is a point of no return internationally, not only in our part of the world. This is a point of no return internationally, where actually people are speaking up. People are saying enough is enough, and it's not only about like now you're seeing celebrities and people in power are either with or against. If we look into our yoga community, if we look into the spiritual leaders who we really highly esteemed spiritual leaders, they're being silent.
Yeah, that is probably one of the hardest things for me to see right now.
Big institutions are being silent. And one of my good friends, actually, she stepped down from one of them, not going to name any names, but because they refused to take a stand.
Right.
because they're funding. And when you get funding from a specific, so again, being true to yourself and doing no harm. Do I want to be an associate with an organization that has a different agenda than what I have? If I'm really seeking a spiritual approach, okay, this is showing me that also there's an agenda and politics behind what I'm doing. So how do I move forward?
Yeah, what do we do if there's yoga teachers here that are listening and they're thinking, "I I'm afraid to speak up," or "I tried to speak up and then I got attacked."
I just say do this history before judgment. Learn the history and then go. Take your own time. I mean, time is ticking next door. And every morning we don't know what we're going to see, but history, go do the history work before judgment, but take action. So really the action you guys can do out there is different than the action we do. We really need media people. We need people in law firms. We need people to really put out petitions and ask for a ceasefire. Ceasefire is the biggest need right now. But how is it going to happen after the ceasefire? This is up to politicians and historians and people who live in this region, and Palestinians in the diaspora and all of that. But for now, in order for sanity to happen, you need a ceasefire. But they're refusing to do a ceasefire to finish the job. But they're not going to finish the job because they're creating more resistance and more hatred. And it's in everybody's name. In everybody's name. And I would say, yeah, stay away from the media Maya. Maya in our field is illusion. And I think the media wants us to look at specific things. Do your own homework. Just like what, like in as a yoga teacher, you hear a certain, you learn a certain yoga pose, right? You go and explore it yourself. You modify it to your own strength and limitations and all of that. You make the pose accessible then to your students. And so do the same for this cause, because again, it's not only about Gaza is teaching us so many lessons. So I think it's really good to really take a really deeper look at everything that we're learning, everything we're sharing with our students. Being sensitive is definitely something very important.
Here's thank you so much for sharing this. Seasonal Intentions said, I visited Israel and Jerusalem many years ago, and it was really eye-opening. The oppression and segregation is very real. I would say listen to the voices of people who have been there. I have been really listening to voices of IDF soldiers who are speaking out about how it has felt. People who live in Israel and have connections with Palestine, and who have visited there and are speaking out. Jewish voices who are saying, like, those voices for me are really holding a lot, and Palestinian voices who are around the world. I think it was you that told me, Rula, that 70% of the population of Jordan is Palestinian.
Yeah, origin.
And that's
Maybe
because of the Nakba?
now but I mean, yeah, as I was growing up, it was, big, because this is where people came to, and we were one. It's not about that division that we see. If we never felt that division here. Palestinians, Jordanians live together and as one community, and everybody's hurting here. It's not like we're hurting alone. And there's something about speaking up from talking to people around is like, at least here we go out in demonstrations, you wear the kufiya, everybody welcomes it, you carry the flag. And I can't imagine being in other places where actually you're condemned for holding the Palestinian flag or wearing the kufiya or saying anything on that. So I feel that we're actually in a space where we're able to express. So I understand when people feel awkward and intimidated. But if you
Yeah.
have the right knowledge and the right terms, that's why I listen to voices from our side, from Palestine, listen to all voices and really pick and choose the words correctly, the terms, and try to understand the root cause is very important. This is all about the cause of the plight of the problem, because
Yeah.
really people lived together before, and everything shifted. 1948, everything shifted, and it got worse and worse and worse, and more division and more division, more killing. Like we had seven. So Hamas was saying, clear the prison, the prisoner, Palestinian prisoners in not prisoners, we call them asra. I don't know if there's a word for that. Anyway, there were 7,000 since Gaza bombing happened. There's 3,000 now from West Bank. So it's like they got out people from prison, but they're taking in more.
Yes. I think that some people are missing that piece of things, that there are Palestinians being
It's
held
not
in
really,
prison. There are
it's not,
children who don't get fair trials and who go 20 years for jail of throwing rocks. There's a lot to look at. I just learned this is the Satya piece, sorry.
yeah.
This is the Satya piece. Learn real
Mm.
facts and then look up, is this a real fact? I learned that people who are in Israeli jails who are Palestinians are held, even if they die in prison, they're held to the end of their sentence. Why would that be? That's so that their families cannot bury them and mourn them. And that
No,
alone, that truth alone, that fact alone says something is I don't know any other country that does that.
I didn't know you knew I was going to share it as we were speaking about the prisons, and I actually I'm surprised you saw that, because I just learned about this recently, and it dehumanizes any human being.
Yeah.
That after you're dead, your corpse are held in prison until you finish your sentence, and some of them are sentenced for. This is a way for to give grief, excruciating grief for families, and it's systematic, and it's part of the psychological war. Not only segregation and apartheid, it's a psychological war, and it's always been psychological. Even when they come and arrest people in the West Bank, they come 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning, or midnight. There's a very systematic psychological disturbance that happens. And I was talking to a friend who works in trauma, and I said, I think after, hopefully, when a ceasefire happens, when we start to really receive these children in Gaza and people, I think there will be cases that no science have ever dealt with. I don't know what kind of traumas. I don't know if they're going to be even called traumas. Like this picture, this image of this Palestinian who was carrying the remains of his child in 2 bags. I don't know if you saw that. Is
I heard about it on the podcast.
how dehumanizing. How more can somebody do to another? I don't know. I mean, this was shocking. The images that are coming are just every day, and when you think you saw the worst, we see the next day, like after
Yeah.
the temporary, we saw even worse attacks. But we're here to.
I know, I know. I know. Well, you can't like, okay, let's think positive our way out of this.
No,
Let's I'd love to know in the comments from
I,
people who are here live, what are you planning on doing? What are some of the action steps that you're taking? I know a lot of yoga teachers who are taking action steps. I know a lot of people who are taking action steps, even if they're not posting on social media. I have a Jewish friend who gave me permission to share this story. She went to a march, or she just ended up in a march. She went to a market, and she went to and all of a sudden the march happened around her. It was in Ottawa. There was 100,000 people
ah,
there. And
yeah.
I said to her, "How was it?" Thinking like, I want to make sure she feels okay and safe there as a Jewish
Mm,
person. She said, "It was the most beautiful, amazing experience." She said, "I think I actually would go to a march." She said she was sobbing in tears. Also, another friend told me they went, and I said, Was there any anti Semitism? Because if there was, I don't want to go. And they were like,
yeah.
No, there was none. Like, this was very a peaceful protest of like calling out harm.
We love life.
Yeah.
That poem is we love life. That's why we resist. It's when we love people, and there's so many things that we heard from Gaza. Again, lessons where if what's happening was happening somewhere else where there is no family ties, no connections, I think people will be killing each other over food or maybe water, and maybe, I don't know. People would be stealing. There's zero of that happening in Gaza, while people losing everything. People are feeding the old, taking care of the old, the women, the children. There's a lot of values in there's a lot of values in our culture, and it's nice for people to look at that. There's a lot of respect for elderly people. Yeah. And there's a lot of respect for children. But mothers in Gaza say, there's a term that says mashrou' shaheed, which is this kid is a project of a martyr, that he can die anytime. And it's okay, because we're all martyrs if it requires that. But these beautiful human values are worth looking into. People are resisting with poetry, with writing. So what you can do, if you write, please write. If you can do a dance, a piece, a music, please express in any way you can, and name that harm. Just express in any way that you can in your communities, because this is a changing point. This is not only for Palestine. This is a changing point for how we're going to live with each other in the future. And if this keeps happening, the picture is not looking very bright, I'm telling you.
Yeah, right.
It's not looking, and this is for our children. My son is in Vancouver now, and going university. And I'm very worried. I know Vancouver is beautiful, and he's safe, and he feels really safe. But imagine that you're not supposed to feel worried in a place like Canada.
Yeah.
And
Like the kids who were going to school in Vermont and were targeted.
Shots, and now one of them is paralyzed for life.
Yeah. No,
So,
and I think it's the same feeling for Jewish people facing anti-Semitism in all around the world as well. Sherry was saying here, I think this is like an action that Sherry's doing in conversation with Jewish folks who rightfully feel afraid or threatened, suggestions for opening a dialogue to begin to consider holding the IDF accountable or calling for a ceasefire. Thank you for doing that, Sherry.
Thank you, Sherry.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think there's the biggest.
What if people feel like when I started watching social media and was hearing of martyrs, like this is completely out of my culture. When you're saying like children are born to be martyrs, what about when that feels really uncomfortable for people because they haven't been exposed to it?
I would say it's difficult to put yourself in the shoes of people in Gaza, because, as we mentioned, we take some things for granted. We take going to school for granted. We take opening our water tap for granted, having internet, electricity for granted, having food, everything for granted. And I think don't feel intimidated by anything. Just open your horizons, drop your guards, and just try to communicate with people on a human level. And it's very important to communicate with people on a human level. And there was this video of a child in Gaza. The lady was asking, what do you want? The gentleman was asking, what do you want when you grow up? And he said, he was confused. He said, us kids in Gaza don't grow up. Like, so it's probably it's not uncomfortable. It's probably uncomfortable for someone to hear that, but it's a reality we live. It's a reality many people around the world will live. I feel entitled. I have a warm bed. I feel like I'm privileged that I have a house still. But we remind ourselves that if this doesn't stop, it's gonna spill over, not only in Palestine. It's probably will spill over in Jordan. It's probably will spill over in other countries where you're constantly dominated by your governments, by censoring, so I would say put fear on the side and think of what you really want for your children. What kind of world do you want for your children? So important. I don't want my children to live like that. Nobody would want that. So as a parent, Ask someone who's equipped with maybe if you're a yoga teacher with certain tools, speak to your teachers to ask them, why are you silent? How can we stop this? Because there's a big community. If you look at the good, we are so big.
Yes.
It's just supposed to unite us, not divide us. And it feels like the world is so small, and we're such a, the world is so small, but we can make a big impact. Imagine how
Yeah.
many, I don't get the statistics, how many yoga teachers around the world, if we all march for, for peace, for humanity.
Yeah, for all humans to be treated equally, for all humans to be free. This is the one thing that does rub me when yoga teachers say we're all connected. I fully believe that. Okay, well now show it. I'm telling you that.
Stops at certain borders.
Right. Right.
Why?
If I was sharing my story of like how my village here in Canada was being bombed, people I
Yeah.
think I think more people would be listening, and that's a sad reality that the Western world is pretty like here in North America, we get
Hmm?
more news coverage, more attention, and I would say, why is that? I would leave that question. And the First Nations people who were here first didn't get that attention and are
Mhm.
still asking for that attention.
Yeah. I mean, we have the narrative for Palestinians have changed. And if you notice the narrative through the 75 years, we have never called ourselves victims. Palestinians were always resisting and showing what the humanity they have. They're always showing because we really experience abundance of life,
Right.
agriculture, poetry, culture, music, films. Like my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, his family, because his dad passed away when he was born, um, they had a cinema, and this was his. When he was little, he used to go to the cinema. This is how he met my grandmother. So there was so much culture, and it's just educate ourselves about that and see how we can really elevate ourselves. And one of the good teachers I follow, there's two teachers I follow, I'm not going to name them because they're not speaking up yet. But I wonder what goes through their mind because they're seeing all of that and they've acknowledged one side. They haven't acknowledged our side. And they're always talking about we have to be the adult in the room when there's a conflict, when there's a bullying happening. We have to be who's the adult. And so I'm asking your audience today, Shannon, who's the adult in the room? Who's being the adult? The leaders? The leaders are just being bullies. The leaders are just being, spoiled. The leaders are not being the adults. So who is really being the adult in the room? Why is no one saying stop? Why is no one saying we know that people are speaking up, but if really we're supposed to have someone as an adult in the room, where is this adult? Who is it supposed to be? A spiritual leader, a religious, think beyond religion. This is not a war. This is what's happening is not a religious thing. It's not. It's just about power and dominance. So
So
who's that?
Sherry oh, sorry, Sherry, thank you for that. Sherry said that she's asking for help with this. Jewish people are feeling afraid, they're feeling threatened. I've had conversations like this. I would not say this is I would not put the weight on you for this, Rula. I would not be expecting you to have these conversations with like, okay, my Jewish Israeli friends are feeling afraid and threatened.
But are they?
Sherry's asking as a North American yoga teacher,
But
like,
these are in North America or?
yeah, Sherry's in North America asking for open dialogue to begin to hold the IDF accountable right now and call for a ceasefire, and also having these tough
Yeah.
conversations with I I had some long conversations, and I'm so grateful for these conversations of really hearing and understanding the level of fear that people are living in, Jewish friends, Israeli friends.
Name the fear. What's the fear about? What is
The
it?
fear they're afraid for their lives. They're afraid that they're not living in freedom. One person said that they're feeling afraid because, they have to keep hiding in their bomb shelter in Israel.
So this is about people in Israel, not here.
Yeah.
What's
This
the
is why
term?
I don't really want you to hold
No,
this.
I get very objective. Don't worry about that. No, no. It's. I would say people in Gaza don't even have bomb shelters,
No, they don't have bomb shelters. They're being bombed in their homes.
and that it doesn't
But
underestimate.
their fear is real. Their fear is
Yeah,
real for
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah. It doesn't underestimate their fear. But I'm saying, okay, if this is gonna stop, it will stop from within Israel. We've seen the people in the streets. They need to keep going. They need to keep going. They need to keep going because they're asking for their hostages to come out. But there many are by the rate Israel is going, all hostages are gonna die. I'm sorry to say that, but they're gonna die with along with it. They're not getting to Hamas. They're in it's this is not helping anybody, and we feel really worried for everybody. Yeah, and what I would say is speak up, especially people who are in Israel. Speak up. Stay in the streets. People are not going home until the ceasefire happens, until
There
some
are some people doing that, and I think, wow,
I
the level of
see that.
bravery of those people,
Yes,
I can't actually imagine.
yeah. But it needs to there's again the society is definitely is not all they're not all on the same line, on the same page. Definitely there's a lot of political factors and all of that, but the pressure when it comes from within the society is different. It's a lot
Mhm.
more. It's a lot more amplified. A lot for Palestinians who live in the West Bank. If you even put any post that is with Hamas or Gaza or whatever, they're detained. So
I love
it's,
how you said call out the harm.
yeah, call out the harm and really keep calling it and push and any tool that you have, use it. And the mothers who are waiting to know what their children happened, their house, all these families need to really. I know there's a lot of suffering everywhere, and it's what's happening, what Israel's doing is not helping anybody.
What's hard for me to understand is that when people are saying, "Let's look at the suffering of Israel," and they're like this, they're just like blinders over here, but we're not gonna look at what's happening to Gaza and the West Bank and parts of Jerusalem.
That
That's really confusing for me as a yoga teacher who I want harm to stop to all people.
that's why October 7th was considered as if the beginning of the whole plan, because there was a big number of victims on the Israeli side.
Mhm.
This is why it was in the media, and for people who don't know the history, thought that this is where the problem started.
Right, right,
No, it's been going on.
right,
And
right. And I
please,
have talked to some people who are like, this is when it began, like, when they say, like, what happened on October 7th and following that, and not looking at the numbers, like,
and to help, any information, please reach out. Resources. I'm happy to share everything that we know. But again, the question you ask is very important for people who live in Israel. It's their call. I think there can be a lot of action there because the only one who can stop it is Netanyahu and the American. But these are the
that's
two
it.
players.
Those are the
Of course,
2
there's a lot
powers.
of backstage players. We know that, but
Right.
are the
You know what? It does make a difference to call your representatives and tell them you want peace. It does make a difference to go out and march. It does make a difference. Every little action makes a difference.
but I'm very concerned about what is the vision for the yoga community. Like,
I don't know. I'll tell you, Rula, and I'll tell everyone who's here live, I'm a little bit heartbroken. I said before in my other one, if I'm gonna get kicked out of the club for calling for peace and freedom for people, I don't wanna be in the club anymore.
yeah, I stepped down from quite a few organizations because it's was going against. But it's if you have ethics and you have satya and you really believe in it and you want to practice it, this is the time where things are sorry, it's testing your genuinity But yeah, but again, we can focus on what we can do. We can't
Okay.
keep on things that
Okay. Thank you.
so we have to keep the focus really on what we can do. Follow people in Gaza, see what's happening, but it's going to traumatize people even more of what's happening. It's too heavy, it's too dark. But as I said this morning, what I did this exercise, I looked at numbers. And then I was like, okay, I need to look at stories. I need to see what's happening. People who, and yeah, yesterday we just heard the news. This friend of ours, her cousin, 10 members were and their little child, who angel-like, and so many children. Nobody deserves that. And so to bring it back to, I would highly recommend Ellen Papay's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of the Palestinian people. It's really good because it's people want sometimes to hear perspective from someone from their side, from their, and as you said, Gabor Mate is also, Gabor Mate talks a lot of sense. The podcast I shared with you, Muhammad Kurdi, is really, really amazing in the way, because he explains all these symbols that intimidate anyone who wants to really stand with Palestine or the cause or the ceasefire, but is afraid to do that. He really clarifies all of that, which is really, I found it, I just listened to it today, a friend shared it, and I felt that it gives an amazing insight of, yeah, okay.
We'll make sure to share that link then to that podcast and the book as well.
Yeah, and the book and the documentary by Al Jazeera, just to give a positive perspective to the history, and that's where everybody really lived together. I hope sometimes I wake up and say, I hope this is just a nightmare, and it can be over, but it's a very hard.
I really have been thinking about you. I know that you have family who are, I don't know if you want to share that or not, that are there
Yeah,
and
it's a family, but we're still. Yeah, thank you, Shannon. They survived the first bombing of the first church, and now they're hiding in the other church. And this is yeah, something that they surrender. They say we're not moving, and whatever happens is going to happen, is our destiny. And again, this comes from great faith. And yeah, so just some advice is really look back and really look at your values again. Really look at the values that you value a lot, or people that you value, and see if they're really speaking up for you, if they're really speaking up for humanity.
yeah. I spoke with another yoga teacher yesterday who had a yoga class with one Israeli student there and one Palestinian student, and she said they ended up rolling out their mats right beside each other. This was earlier in October, and she said that she finished the class, and the Israeli student said, "Aren't you going to say something? Aren't you going to say a prayer for Israel or something?" And she said it was quite abrupt, and she said, "Would you like to say a prayer for Israel?" And so then the student did, and everyone was there and present, and then she turned to the Palestinian yoga student and said, "Would you also like to say a prayer for Palestinian people?" And I just think that teacher in that moment held space in a really beautiful way, so that student then said a prayer. And in tiny ways in your community, you're making a difference. And if we are not calling out the harm before October the 7th, maybe we don't know about it yet. It's our job to really understand it if we are holding space for all bodies. Like living in Canada, there's all kinds of Palestinians here in Canada. All over the world there are, because they've had to leave their home. Yeah. Someone is commenting here, and I want to address this, and I know this is going really long. Thank you. Someone is saying, like, call for peace from both sides. Don't pick sides. Then yoga community will support. I will can I address this, Rula? And then I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over it.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Let me just compare it to, what happened in Canada here with, like, our '60s scoop and our genocide of Indigenous people because our government has come forward and said, "Yes, it was a genocide," and the government did it, and there's a long story to that. Am I gonna take sides in that? Am I gonna take sides in an oppression?
Mm.
That's what someone's asking me to do.
I would ask, is it equal powers? Is there someone that has the upper hand? Is there someone who definitely, if you stop oppression, the resistance will, it's a balance. But are you speaking about equal powers? Are you speaking about two armies? Are we so in it's
Right now, it feels like it's innocent civilians. That's what I'm seeing. The majority of people is innocent civilians who not only since October the 7th, it feels like much longer.
But when the whole thing started, actually, Shannon, I stepped away from my yoga philosophy. I was actually reading Lao Tzu, The Art of War, the book. And they say that war, even the Bhagavad Gita, where the battlefield, wars were fought in open lands, not in civilian play, like if they want to go into. So this is in the heart of a highly condensed residential area. And so when there was the 5-day ceasefire, yeah, of course, Hamas stopped. There was no, it's just about try to get out of the context that this is an equal formula. It's not.
Here's Linda Sparrow. Thank you for sharing this. The imbalance of power and the intention of the Zionist government makes it impossible to suggest there's equal suffering on both sides.
Yet Palestinians are always willing to be open for solutions, and we showed that over and over and over. But Palestinians have been betrayed so many times, starting with in 1948 and before, by the Arabs, also by Arab leaders. Many Arab countries are having all these economic relations with Israel. So Palestinians say that more than once. They don't need your pity. They don't need anybody's pity. They just want justice so they can really stand on their feet and have their homeland. And it doesn't say we're going to genocide. And this is not about that. So that's why it's not equal when we speak. But any questions related to what is making you feel awkward in sharing, please, I'm happy to answer. And yeah, I hope we're really answering questions.
Yeah. Linda said one more thing here that I think is really important, and I'm glad that Linda's speaking out here, saying Netanyahu has made his intentions plain, and that is to destroy the Palestinian people. That is what he has said publicly.
But they say it publicly, and they go ahead and say that we watch it on live screens. That's the mind-boggling reality of it all. Show you that it's not equal.
Yeah.
It's not equal, and it's not right, and we need to name it. And later, the Palestinians everywhere will work on the step forward. But for now, nothing can happen. Nothing good is going to happen if this continues, unfortunately.
I want to thank you because you have given us an hour and a half of your time in one of them. Yes, it's gone by quickly. In a time when it's complete crisis, when you're looking at your people facing genocide in Gaza and in the West Bank and parts of Jerusalem, when I know you personally that it's a hard thing to even be able to go back and visit home and visit family, and you're also holding space for so many people in your community. I just appreciate you so much. I appreciate that you even reached out and said, "Can we talk about this?" I appreciate the people who are here live or watching the replay. If this looks messy and feels messy and you're like, "Oh, Shannon should have asked this or done this or Rula should have said this," you try it. you try and talk about something that is so, and I've said to people multiple times, go ahead, make your own content. You talk about it. But and I would say let that be the encouragement of speaking up.
I'm
Like,
happy to again if anybody wants to. We're happy to always speak up.
yeah. Sherry
And
said, one thing I've learned is I'll never get it perfect, but keep trying, learning. Yoga teachers, this is a practice of taking very uncomfortable, very
yes,
necessary action. Oh my gosh, Sherry,
thank you.
I'm feeling that in my heart. Like, I feel like it's going to come out as tears.
Yeah, it's very uncomfortable, and I think especially in Canada, people are very want to be very kind and very appropriate with everyone, and I think this is part of the problem. We always want to be. It's a good thing, but it is part of
Just so you know, everyone, Rula also is Canadian.
I know. I'm part. I lived with Canadian. I love Canadians. That's why I'm speaking from the heart
You know.
because I see how kind people are, and they're always very careful of what to say. I loved it. But in these times, it's okay to say something where you feel it's true. Yeah. And sometimes we're being kind because we're supposed to be kind, but it's different when you want to be kind and compassionate in times where actually you feel genuine about it. And I was hearing one of Tara Brach. I follow her meditations. I love her meditations, and she was saying in times of trauma, because she did this episode about the practice in times of divide, and she said the soul goes into hiding in these times. There's no common sense. People can't think of their future. So I don't blame people who are going through genocide, and I don't blame them for but yet they're saying thank God. They're trying to do their best. But the image of the soul goes into hiding is very, very powerful. Let's imagine that it's the soul goes into hiding due to trauma. But going back to our Canadian fellow lovely teachers, it's do it the best way you can, the most appropriate way, but address it, at least address it. There's so many words that we can use where we can still be polite and we can still be compassionate to the others, and we can. I was really choosing my words today. I hope I didn't really offend or make anyone feel uncomfortable or
You,
awkward.
it's your
But
lived
I mean,
experience as a Palestinian person. I think you're allowed to share how it's feeling. Someone said, thank you both. Thank you, Rula, for inviting your sage group to this. We appreciate you, and we're here for you. Hari Krishna.
oh,
Uh, oh, sorry. Do you want to read it? You
no,
maybe
it's
know who it is.
I don't know. We'll see.
And Crunch was saying, if you're neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. Desmond Tutu said that, saying, thank you, Crunch. It's
I think
taking a lot. There are people who are like facing the backlash for speaking out. Also, being like their jobs are threatened. Yeah.
yes, many jobs people are, but
And
yeah.
it'll get easier if there's more people standing on the side of like peace and equality and freedom. It will get easier.
And the real meaning of the things we preach, yeah, like
Yeah.
activity, accessibility, like all these terms we use, what are they meaning right now? They're empty for me. Many things, many words are just empty, and I really want to fill them back up. I really want them, the word of humanity, to really mean humanity, and justice to really feel justice, not to feel only for a specific group. And
Right.
I want it for everybody. We're
Yeah.
not. We want it for everybody.
How do our listeners connect with you further?
My website is under construction.
That's okay. Maybe it'll be ready and we can put the link in at some point.
Yeah, I think the best way is Instagram.
Okay.
But I'm sorry, my Instagram is hijacked currently by the plight in Gaza. But on Instagram, I would say for the moment, I'm not using Facebook much. And hopefully, once my website is back. But I look forward. I really want to thank you and name your team. Shannon, Shanida, Susan, and Crunch for doing this. I follow your podcast since really a while, and really you walk the talk, because you're a connected yoga teacher and you're really connecting yoga teachers. And I really think there's a big role for your voice right now as a connected yoga teacher. It goes by the name of your podcast, and I think you're really, as a team, doing really a great job of connecting yoga teachers. And hopefully we inspire other communities and other people, not only yoga teachers and our children. And hopefully we pray for a better future for all children, because all children and future generations deserve something better. But we can
Yeah.
see that we have hope in the younger generation, as what we see.
Thank you so much, Rula. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you everyone who's been here for the live or for the replay. Thank you.
Thank one and being open. And please, any questions, I welcome it privately. And another thing you can do actually is something that I've been receiving. Some people don't want to speak up in public. They've been reaching out for me privately. So if you know a friend who's Palestinian, or someone who you know you want to share something, please reach out to them privately. They would
Yeah.
really appreciate it, and it's much needed. Thank you.
Thank you.